All right, it is now my privilege to bring to you Mr. Jonathan Carlson's paper, The Law of Life.
Across thousands of years, many philosophers have stressed the importance of order in life. The order around one's life determines how well a life will be potentially lived. It is frequently asked then, how does one have order in his life? The answer to this question is that in order to live a well-ordered life, one requires the existence of law. Law can most prevalently be seen in society, affecting not just the well-being of an individual, but the well-being of a vast number of people and the society as a whole. In order for a society to function properly, there must be a power in place to create laws that will bring benefit to the country. More than one type of law exists. There are human law, natural law, and eternal law. When one follows natural law, a law that is already established within one nature, an individual is also following eternal law. For example, in natural law, law must abide over one's body to establish unity and order in an individual's life. When these laws are obeyed, it gives one the ability to create order and beauty. Since human law has its place in society over a body of people, eternal law also has a place in one's spiritual life. The presence of this form of law in one's spiritual life affects the government of its soul. This government may be the most important form as a result in the eternal destination of the soul. Although it is imperative to have law over one's soul, government over oneself and society still holds an important role. Each type of law plays a unique role, encouraging the formation of order and beauty within each respective sphere of influence. The most prominent form of law in human law is called human law or law in society. The most public and prevalent type affecting masses of people who neighbor with one another. Oftentimes, this law over society comes from some form of power.
You know what, Jonathan? I'm sorry to have to interrupt you. For some reason, I have the old version of your paper, and I need the new version of your paper to be able to follow along. Can I get you to pause there and just forward this paper to me?
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry
Do I need to re-forward you this then?
Yes, if you could just re-forward it to me. I'm not quite sure how I got the wrong version here, but for some reason, the version I have is the older version.
Okay, got it. Just give me a second.
All right, sorry to have to interrupt you.
There you go.
All right, and you can go ahead and get started. I'll just pick up with the other paper when that comes in. So, thank you very much. You can go ahead and resume as soon as that's sent. Caleb Radine, it looks like your microphone is on. Caleb, if you can make sure your microphone's off, that'd be very helpful.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Jonathan, you got that sent off and can get restarted?
Yeah, just about. Alright, you should have it in your.
All right, thank you very much. You can go ahead.
Alright, did it come through? Let's see.
It'll take a little while. My email is slow, so I think we should just go ahead and get started, and I will switch over when it comes.
I'll start at the top of the segment. Alright. The most prominent form of law is human law or law in society. The most public and prevalent type affecting masses of people who neighbor with one another. Oftentimes, this law over society comes from some form of power. In many cultures, numerous people spend their lives striving to obtain power through various pathways. Some are born with power, passing it down from generation to generation, retaining familial power. Others obtain power by their own means, such as through war and conquering and acquiring other powers. Power can be defined as the ability to do something or act in a particular way, especially as a faculty or quality, and to have the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behaviors of others or the course of certain events. If an individual receives power, he can use it in one or two ways: possibility of good or for the possibility of evil. While every person who desires power has a unique motivation for gaining it, each will fall into one of three general categories. First is a personal will for power, the second a political will for power, and the third is a spiritual will for power. These powers not only can control a person's life, but it may also affect the people surrounding the individual. Since the end goal of many people's lives is to gain importance, they utilize unlawful and unethical means to achieve the status. Law is required to keep radically minded people in check and avoid catastrophe. The power in a country can either decimate the country, resulting in death and pain, or allow the country to thrive and prosper. Thus, the law must be strict on those who are able to obtain power, encouraging them to use it wisely. This power must be used not for just their own good, but for the good of the people in that country. In order for the country to prosper, this power must create and enforce good laws for the people. Those who disregard the law established by this power must accept the consequences that result from breaking the law. In this way, those in power are able to maintain order within society. Therefore, one must have law in order to establish and maintain a healthy and thriving society. Just as human law is required to govern a society, so also must natural law preside over oneself. As St. Thomas Aquinas stated in his Summa Theologica, the natural law abides in man always, but man's reasons, which the law regards, does not always think about the natural law. This natural law, abiding within every human being, can be thought of as an instinct placed within each person. These instincts set standards which tell us one the difference between what is true and what is immoral. In other words, natural law is the inherent law, telling us what is right and what is wrong. Natural law is important and greatly needed in an individual's life, keeping unity and stability between people and setting moral standards. It also forces one to do what is not only good for oneself, but also to do that which is in the best interest for others. Natural law is an important part of eternal law, which St. Augustine expounds on by saying, "The eternal law is that by which it is right that all things should be most orderly." When one follows natural law, one also follows the eternal law, which will bring order and beauty to one's life. In opposition to natural law, there exists the sinful and human will of man. This will of man drives one to chase after one's own ad libitum in order to achieve his wants. Aristotle briefly describes these conflicts, utilizing the illustration of a white and black steed. The struggle causes inordinate disorder, driving man to follow his own desires and please his stomach, rather than heeding the conscience of the mind. Geoffrey Chaucer describes well the tension between natural law and man's will, the battle between moral instincts and human desire. In Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, there are three examples that show the common nature of mankind, a nature in which both natural law and the will of man exist. Natural law is an inherent law that tells one the difference between what is right and what is wrong. This is a vital component, as it will be one's guide through life until one draws his final breath. On the other hand, there exists a fallen evil that inherently exists in one's being. This evil is the will of man and may cause one to disobey the natural law. In the Canterbury Tales, many characters fall into the evils of the will of man. Likewise, one can observe a knight who is trained to be chivalrous be overcome by the desires of his flesh. However, when one obeys and stays true to the natural law, one will experience the goodness, beauty, and order that results from resisting fleshly desires. Similarly to this, the great philosopher Plato describes the importance of the rule of law in one's own body. As Plato once said, thinking is talking to the soul within itself. And Plato stresses the importance of having law governed over one's mind and order in one's life. In fact, in Plato's The Republic, Plato addresses the importance of having control over both body and soul, beginning by describing the three main parts of the body and of the soul, which must be governed. This government of the body is imperative for the soul to be able to live an orderly life. The first and foremost part of the body of the soul is the head. The head makes rational decisions, stores information, and originates thinking from the mind. The head also preserves good knowledge and stores sound reason in the mind. The head makes important decisions and is aware of the natural human law. The chest is the next part of the body of the soul and is controlled by the head. The chest is where the heart is located, where emotions, feelings will reside. From the chest spring concepts such as courage and chivalry. The emotion and will from the chest cause one to remain steadfast and pursue courage and passion. The final part of the soul is the belly, which contains fleshly desires such as lust, wealth, sexual encounters, and good food. In a well-ordered person, the head will govern the chest, and the chest rules over the body. Rational thinking from the head holds the chest in check. Reason is impaired with emotion, thereby holding each other in healthy tension. Likewise, the chest governs the belly, controlling fleshly desires with emotion curbed by reason. Thus, through the harmonious union of three parts, the head, chest, and stomach hold together and organs created in one. Plato points out that if one were to let his stomach rule in place of one's mind, his life would lead in chaos and madness. If one allows desire to govern his life will turn to chaos, but if governed by the mind, it will stay ordered. Don Quixote's reverse ordered life allows his stomach to govern his heart and mind. It is the root and the cause of his humorous insanity. Fantasies and quests of adventure drive him to leave the real world and be whisked away into an entirely fantastical universe. Rather than avoiding the mistakes of allowing fantasy, passion, and desire to rule his life by maintaining a well-ordered life, Don Quixote does the opposite of what Plato recommends in the Republic. Don Quixote lets his stomach control his chest and his chest control his mind. Rather than allowing his mind to govern his chest and then his chest rule his stomach, since Don Quixote does not hold his chest emotions, and since Don Quixote does not hold his chest emotions and will be accountable to the sound thinking of his mind, he allows the fantasies of his stomach to take control and lead him astray, instantly polluting his mind and causing it to grow weak. Due to the strength of Don Quixote's stomach and the progressive weakness of his mind, he allows his mental state and rationality to be led astray. Don Quixote makes the mistake of granting his stomach control rather than his head, leading him towards the ultimate loss of sanity and rational thinking. Don Quixote's madness alters his state of mind so much that his friends eventually wall off his library and burn almost all of his books. They curse the books which they hold responsible for the friend's maddened state. When Don Quixote asks whatever happened to my library, his niece convinces him that an enchanter came on a cloud with a dragon, took the books, and left the house full of smoke. Don Quixote regularly pleads her tales and clarifies that this enchanter is in fact his arch-nemesis. Don Quixote's love for books led him to believe this fantasy, referring back to familiar stories laced with imaginary accounts. As a result of reading tale after tale of a knight in shining armor, Don Quixote loses control of his mind's ability to separate fantasy from reality and began behaving more knight-like in his everyday life, acting courteous and chivalrous to others. Ultimately, these actions eventually led him to complete insanity, donning armor and declaring himself to be a knight. This continuously fed Don Quixote's stomach and desire for fantasy through his love of books, and it caused Don Quixote's head to lose control and thereby lose his rationality. By this madness, not only has Don Quixote endangered himself, but also endangered the lives of others. An example was they had not gone far before Don Quixote sighted a man on horseback wearing something golden on his head. No sooner had Don Quixote seen this than he said to his squire, "There comes towards us now one who wears the helmet of Mambrino." The truth is, the helmet Don Quixote saw was a barber's basin that the barber had placed on his head in order to be protected from the rain. Don Quixote saw that the barber, whom he perceived to be a knight, be charged with his lance, and this caused the barber to flee, which leaving his basin and belongings on the ground. When Sancho Panza picked up the basin, he instantly said, "By God, if it is not a very good basin and worth a piece of eight." Although Sancho told Don Quixote its true purpose, Don Quixote was still convinced that it was a helmet and placed the basin on his head. So how could one fall so deep into this fantasy world that one's mind perceives such things as windmills to be giants? It is a mix of wishful thinking and laziness of the mind which led Don Quixote down this path of madness. The weakening of his mind began with a good thing, reading and falling in love with his personal story books, but was taken to an extreme, with Don Quixote using his library to escape the reality of this world and turn to fantasies and tales for hours. He would often fantasize about being a knight of old, eventually allowing his wishes and desires to rule his life. By following his passions, Don Quixote disorganized his life and became a madman, living a life run by the very chaos and madness of which Plato warned his readers. Just as law has its place in one's society or body, law also has a specific place in one's spiritual life. The law in one's spiritual life, eternal law, directly affects the government of one's soul. In Dante's series of books called the Divine Comedy, Dante is portrayed as a man who has fallen away from his godly spiritual path. Dante is then eventually met by the ancient poet Virgil, who was sent by heaven to save Dante, bring him back to following God's law by leading Dante on a spiritual and physical journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise. As Dante passes through hell, he witnesses the residents being tormented. They are the ones who have broken the law and have no hope of going to paradise, yet can see that light supreme within its fathomless clear substance. These souls are tortured and are put in such a fashion that through the chaos of hell, each member of hell pays for his unchristian heart and all unlawful acts on earth. The people who abide in Mount Purgatory are the ones who are still Christian and will eventually reach paradise. But they must spend time working in purgatory in order to purge away their earthly sins and misdemeanors. After each is finished purging their sin, he will be able to go to paradise and be viewed as worthy in the sight of the Lord. The citizens that are in paradise are the ones who are closest to God spiritually and physically. They are deemed acceptable in the sight and presence of the Lord. These are the ones who have obeyed God's law and have faithfully followed his commandments, as well as those who have journeyed through purgatory and purged their sins. These three realms in the afterlife demonstrate the order that is woven in God's own character. Through the Divine Comedy, one can see that the closer to God a soul is, the more organized and perfect the person or soul can become. It is through holding through to eternal law that the soul begins to draw near to God, finding beauty in him. Through these examples given by Chaucer and Dante, one can observe the roles of the law over the mind, heart, and desire. One can see how the role of eternal law plays on earth and how it affects those in the afterlife. And also see how one who follows the law, they lead to paradise, and the ones who attempt to follow the law and fail are sent to purgatory, and the ones who disregard the law completely are sent to hell. Law can be most prevalently seen in society as it affects the well-being of numerous people. In order for society to function, as previously stated, the law must preside. Likewise, law must also abide over one's body, causing one to follow the eternal law. When this is obeyed, the result will cause order and beauty to take place in life. Just as law is important in society or body, law also has its place in one's spiritual life. The law in one's spiritual life will affect the government of its soul. This government will result in the eternal destination of the soul. When one does not follow these instructions, the path that is being walked to its destination will lead to destruction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlson. I appreciate that. All right, Mr. Carlson, I would like you to begin by explaining your different applications of law that you've given here. You've explained law as it applies to our personal life and personal order. You've talked about law as it applies to the state, and you've also talked about law in its relationship to our spiritual lives. Can you kind of break each of those three down and kind of help us to see what it is that you're saying about law in each of those areas?
Yeah, so I've referenced as the most prominent form of law is the human law or the law in society because this is the laws that people make. So for instance, in the United States of America, we have in 1776 we declared independence, and then we made the Constitution in the 1800s. We made the Constitution. We said these are some laws that we're gonna live by. So that is more of the human laws. So those are the laws that we make. So these are the laws that we decide what is wrong or right and what is good or bad. And these are just the country's laws. Now, a lot of these laws come from the natural law, and the natural law is the law that resides. It's kind of like an instinct. So the natural law is, we can think of as we were born with a natural law. So the natural law says, do not kill. So we as people, when we were born, not only were trained and raised up to say, hey, you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't do these bad things, but that is that's like an instinct inside of us that tells us that we should not kill each other. And so a lot of the human law is derived from the natural law, because those could be kind of thought of as already given laws, already standards that are kind of placed in our bodies and our souls, and those laws, human laws, are made off of those natural laws. Then I also talked about what I reference as called the spiritual law, which is a good way to put it, and that is, or the eternal law is what it's called, but that's what is going to happen to us, to our souls. So instead of these more earthly things, so these things that are more part of our body or more part of what happens around us, these are more eternal things, so things that happen with our soul. And I talked about that kind of, about what Dante's view, at least, the more Catholic view of purgatory, hell, and paradise. And so, in a Christian life, as a Christian, I believe that the eternal law is achieved through Jesus Christ and through believing in Him as our Lord and Savior, because He saved us. But that is my belief. That's my eternal law, and that's the law that I abide by, is God's law, because that is the eternal law that's going to affect me for the rest of eternity, rather than the here and now, which is earth.
All right, thank you very much. Now, you didn't bring it up in your paper, but I think it'd be also helpful if you could comment on Martin Luther's understanding of the law in relationship to us. You've talked about how the law is very beneficial to us, providing discipline, both personally and with regard to the state. However, Luther takes a very negative view of the role of the law in our life. And could you say perhaps, maybe first explain what that view of Luther was on the place of the law, and also how that relates to these other types of law that you've given?
Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember exactly all that Luther was saying, but I believe he thought that the more human law was bad because it could be flawed. Is that correct? And that
no, it's more the spiritual application of law. He says that there's a very detrimental spiritual effect of law, at least as it applies to our spiritual lives, that it can actually be very detrimental to us.
So, trying to remember with Martin Luther. So I believe his take versus what Plato was saying is that what I wrote about in my paper was just that the eternal law is what is going to have the most effect on us, is what I was trying to say, because that is what's going to, in the end, eternally, that's what's going to affect us the most, because that's where our soul is going to go. And so it's separating the soul from the body, and separating the soul from what happens on earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just remind you a little bit of what Luther talked about. Luther saw the role of law as being very detrimental to us, because he saw the law as being opposed to grace, and that when we look to the law, we look to the law and law keeping as the means by which we gain favor with God, rather than through the grace of Christ. And so he was always very worried that the law would be something that draws us away from God by making us dependent or put our trust in the keeping of the law rather than the grace of Christ. And so in that way, Luther was very suspicious of the law, at least in its spiritual application. He didn't think that you shouldn't have civil laws. Certainly the government should still have laws and impose those, because there's bad people out there. But that the law is actually very detrimental to us spiritually. So that's what I was referring to, and I was kind of wondering if you could say more about maybe contrasting that view of the law with the kind of the more positive view of the law that Plato takes. It's really important to have law in shaping our character, and it's very beneficial in our life.
Right, so I remember, Luther, he was saying how the law, it can be to, people may say, to get in order to achieve eternal life, you have to abide by just the law rather than what nowadays we might call doing like looking at the heart versus like doing the works. We might call it more like that nowadays. But yeah, I think Luther's point was, I think it's a valid point saying that we can put too much faith and trust in just saying if we do these things, if this is the law, so if we do this, we will get to heaven. I think Luther's point is totally valid in the fact that there are people who believe that just by doing these works and doing these certain things will get you to heaven and will achieve your eternal destination. But at the same time, you got to be aware of saying what is the law, what is the right thing. So you do have to be aware of saying rephrases. So you do have to be wary of saying, let me just abide by just these things in order to get to heaven. But what Plato's really saying is, and what more I believe is that you do have to have these rules in place to live and abide by in order to get to heaven. But these are more standards, and these are more things that you should be doing. Now, Martin Luther's take was that people get too caught up in doing these things, and they'll be too focused on the on what the law is rather than on God. And I believe though, if you aren't anal about it, if you do what is generally right in your heart, and that is obeying God's law, because God does give us commands in the Bible, and He gives the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, His greatest commands are to love God and then to love others. And so those are the very, very basic two greatest commands. And so I think it's important for us to follow those commands, but at the same time, we can't get too caught up into the law, such as the Sadducees and Pharisees, who are all about the law, and they're all about if you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. And so there has to be, I think, like a middle point where you can still obey the law, but where your heart still has to be following God, and can't be all about the law.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your answers. Let's go to other people. Others have questions for Mr. Carlson. All right. Any questions for Mr. Carlson? Mr. Hendricks Jr. is giving it some thought over here. All right, go ahead, Benjamin.
So what would you say is the comparison between God's law and governmental law, in the sense that with God's law, if you follow the spirit behind the law, then it's right, because God can see your spirit. But then with government, all they can see is your actions. And so how does that work with governmental law? Like in an ideal society, would people follow laws that were based on, like where a government was able to see your spirit? Would people follow laws based on that they were following the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law? Or is it just, so basically, is it just a current limitation that government has, which is why we have things that are so about specific things in the letter of the law? Or would it be better to have it so that even governmental laws were based on the spirit rather than the actual outflow of the law?
Okay, well, thanks, Ben. First of all, hi, Ben. Good to see you. Thank you for asking that question.
Hope you get better.
I think, where was I go? Personally, as a Christian, I believe that this is a whole question kind of church and state. Is that kind of what you're getting? Is that kind of a question? Is like, should there be an element of the church within the law, like within the...
Well, what I'm asking is not necessarily that the church itself would be in the law, but you know how in any Christian morality, God cares about the heart rather than what you actually do?
Right.
Well, because if your heart is right, then you're obviously going to do good stuff for God. But would it be better in a government for the government to care about your heart? Like, it's obviously not possible, but if it was some way possible, would it be better for a government to be like, okay, you guys can do whatever as long as your heart's in the right place? Would that be an ideal governmental situation?
I don't believe that would be an ideal government situation. One, so I'll give two scenarios. So one, because I said the government is perfect, government is flawless, government is God, right? I'll say government is God. In that sense, if the government knew everything behind the motive behind man's actions, that wouldn't be an inherently bad thing. I don't necessarily believe, because I mean, at that point, the law basically would be God saying, I know this person, their actions. Now, because it'd be the same thing for a human. God knows reasons behind a person for doing something. So it still doesn't matter if somebody steals, but they have a reason behind the heart. God still is going to look down upon that as something bad, as a sin, right? But then, I'll give my other comparison. Since government is not perfect, we definitely can't put government in that position, because government doesn't have the all-knowing, all-seeing eye. So we can't give government the place to just look at man's heart, because we could say, well, I just stole from this person because I need to help my family, and that person was a terrible person, so they deserved it anyway. And the government might say, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes it completely inherently fine. Which obviously it's not fine, but if government were to look at the heart, it could get corrupted, because that government is not perfect.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, Mish Hashtag.
Hi, Jonathan. Really good paper, especially since I know you're kind of sick and it's late at night for you, so good job considering all those factors too. So I have two questions for you. So you mentioned that basically that God's law is the first you should want to follow, of course, but how, if you were to rank all three of them, what would be the order of deference you should give?
Sorry, you kind of drove off at the end. Can you state that again?
Here, I'll move closer so I can be loud.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It's okay. So you mentioned in your paper that I am missing distance. You
You're fine now.
You mentioned in your paper that God's law, of course, should be the first you should follow in any situation. But out of all three, what would be the order of deference that you would give?
Meaning the order. Meaning like the order of importance, right? Like
Yeah.
order of importance.
Yeah, so you're like, okay, I'm going to follow God's, and I'm going to follow this, and then I'm going to follow. What would be your...
Okay. I think my personal view is to follow God's law first, and then I'd say follow the natural law, and then follow the human law, because human law can always be corrupt, and since natural law, we're just going to say there are always the rare cases of where somebody thinks that it is okay to murder somebody, or it is okay to steal. I'm saying, like, as a generally people say that they're born with the inherent knowledge that they should not murder another human being. So I'm going to stick with that. So I'd say that we should follow that law, because that one can't necessarily be corrupted, and rather, and then I'd say follow the human law after the natural law, because human law can be corrupted. I mean, that's a reason for a lot of different wars and conflicts, is because like, look at the different world wars, there's a lot of governments that weren't necessarily sticking for the right thing. Like, look at Nazi Germany in World War II. They did a lot of things that were human rights violations. And so I'd say, since humans are flawed, and I'd say follow God's law, follow the natural law, and follow human law.
Okay, great. And then my other question is, how would you, not necessarily like Aquinas or anybody else who's talked about this, but how would you qualify a law that's more universal, so like not murdering? Because God says not to murder, our human laws say not to murder, but then natural law also tells us instinctively not to murder. How would you classify that?
I think a good example of just like a general law on Earth is kind of what the, like not to sound like super patriotic or whatnot, but it's kind of what the American colonies did, is because they based, because we aren't like a Christian country, we based a lot of our morals off of what is godly and what is true. So if I had to set up a government like that, I would set up a government. I would try and do the same thing. Stick to basic morals and then do what is right for country. And then as a country grows, you may have to have different laws. For instance, they didn't have laws saying that you can't drive on the left side of the road back in 1700 because they didn't have cars, right? So then you might have to alter your laws to coincide with what your country is, how your country is doing at that time. But that's what I personally say, is try and stick as close that you can with the natural law, because that can be a good guide to knowing what is right and wrong, because that's kind of like a conscious or an instinct that is within inside of us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's go ahead, Paul.
Yo, what's up, Jonathan? So I guess Chick-fil-A is just ruined for you now, right?
It wasn't Chick-fil-A, actually, no. It's just chicken.
Alright, I mean, still though, like, you won't be able to stand the sight of chicken anymore after that.
I mean, I might not eat chicken for a little bit, but I'm always hungry, so I'll probably eat chicken in the next couple weeks. The answer was Chick-fil-A, so.
That's true. Well, it's great to see you. Nice pick, bro.
Thanks, appreciate it.
So my question is, what would happen to a society if they based their what would happen to a society if they wrote their human laws based on natural law rather than God's law?
I think that a lot of our laws are based off of the natural law, and God's, like, I give the example of the United States, right, following or God's law, but like a lot of that is the natural law. I think a lot of these laws that I don't want to say a lot because we have a bunch of these very mumbo jumbo laws. I'm just saying specifically in the United States and in Canada. I'm sure there's like Section A, B, whatever, but sticking to like the basics, I think that a country run by more natural law would be inherently better, and because those are the instincts within us to say do not murder. So these can be kind of universal laws rather than religious laws, because people have different religious views. And that's the whole question of church and state, which I don't know if Mr. H wants me to get all into right now. But there are different like religious views, so I think it'd be easier to bring people together if there is just natural law. But a lot of natural law, I think, is what is just inherently what is right or wrong, and that is known through like eternal law and spiritual law as just what is right and wrong. So does that answer your question?
I mean, kind of. What I was sort of thinking is, if godly law was just completely ignored and all you were left with is human law and human instinct.
Oh, okay. So like we're basically like animals now, but we still have the human law.
Yeah, you still have rational thinking.
Okay, I personally think that it wouldn't be too different than the world that we're seeing now, because we're living in a sinful world. And so I think if God just left and his presence is still here, so that's why we're still here. But let's say he left, but let the world do what it does right now. I personally think that it wouldn't be too terribly different, because there is a lot because we are already in a broken, sinful world, and there's a lot of things that God does that we don't see. But I say God has taken out the equation. It's just the humans and the natural law, because I think there are inherently good people on this earth, and some people are born with these natural laws. I think it wouldn't be too different than what we see now because a lot of people do what is best for them, but then a lot of people do what is good for others. So I think you just get a big mix of that, of just people doing what they think is good for themselves, and at the same time, some people doing what is good for other people. But I think it'd be a lot more people just doing what is good for themselves. Personally, that's what I believe. But I don't think it'd be too different than the world that we see nowadays.
Yeah, because humans are selfish animals. All right. Thank you for that. That answers my question.
All right, Molly Kaiser, go ahead, please.
Okay, really good paper, by the way. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if this question is gonna make a whole lot of sense, but you keep talking about like natural law and like that innate like knowing of like what's right and wrong. But how would you explain kind of the natural law of cultures who like their kind of justice system kind of contrasts greatly with like eternal law?
Okay, so these would be like the cannibalistic, like.
Yeah, like there's, I forget if it was a Native American or if it was an African tribe, but like honorable to them and like their justice system was basically like if you were like a backstabber. Like that was their kind of like morals and like natural law. So like how would you explain that, I guess, if that makes sense?
I guess how I would explain that is, like I said, I think I previously stated this earlier, like people as a sense, I say natural law as a whole, but there are the cases of people who exist outside of natural law, and that would be one of those cases. And personally, I don't have a 100% question to this because I've never seen it firsthand and haven't done enough research on people in tribes like this. But I would say that they've more lost the natural law in the feeling what is right, and they're doing more what is more human law. So over time, they've just stated, this is my take on this, over time they've just stated that this is the law, and this is what's right, and this is what's wrong. So over time, they've lost their sense of natural law, but have moved on more to their laws that they've made themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
All right, other questions for Mr. Carlson? I would like you to go back to your use of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I have to admit, when you're first getting started with your lecture there, I was messing around trying to find the other version of your paper, so sorry for that confusion there. But you had mentioned Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and could you clarify for us again what the observations were that you were making by making reference to the Canterbury Tales?
My observations were how there was time after time in the Canterbury Tales that are shown where they were. First, to give an example of a knight, he was in the Knight's Tale. He was trained to be chivalrous and trained to do what is good, but then he was overcome by his natural desires. This has been seen through other tales and the Canterbury Tales, and I won't get too in depth and too explicit, but that has been shown how it can be these religious people following after their stomach, and how it didn't necessarily end well for them. So my point is how these people were following their stomach, and they're following what is wrong. They're following what is wrong instead of doing what is inherently right.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much. Also, you made a lot of reference to Don Quixote, and what is the sort of morals that you're taking from Don Quixote, or the lessons that you're learning from the life of Don Quixote and its application to law and the individual?
Yeah, so I realized I expounded a lot on Don Quixote, and I think a part of that is because I just found the way he progressed and his mind progressed as very intriguing, because it's not like this could, it's not necessarily realistic, but in a sense it could happen. I mean, he got obsessed with his books, and then his books he eventually he wanted to live that fantasy, and then he eventually did it. He put himself in the shoes of a knight, and he went on his own endeavors and his own quests, and he had his own squires. I think, of course, it's interesting because it's comical. It's quite funny to see these stories, and it's quite disappointing at the same time to see how stupid he was. But it's interesting to see how, I thought this was a very good example to show how his stomach took control of his mind, because he literally lost his mind. And I think that's why I expounded so much on it, is that Don Quixote, he literally went mad. He lost his mind, didn't have control over his mind, but what was taking control was his stomach, and then his stomach said, I'm going to do this, and then he listened to his stomach, and he followed his stomach rather than letting his mind take control and letting his mind order his body. So it's just a good example of showing how what happens when the stomach takes control, how he gets so caught up in these adventures and fantasies that he goes quite mad, and he does this outright stupid stuff, and how he makes himself look like an idiot, because he basically turns into an idiot.
All right, and could you say more about the relationship that you see in Don Quixote to the connection with law? Do you see Don Quixote's problem as somehow being an example of the absence of law in his life?
Right, he had the absence of law. So Don Quixote, he started out having control over his head. So he was ordered. So it's all about having order of his mind and of his stomach, and then of his belly, of his chest, and then of his belly, and then of his stomach. So you can see him. You can see how this breaks his natural law, because natural law is a driving force in this, because he can't think and do what is necessarily right, and that affects his emotions. He almost kills somebody because he is driven mad, and he goes on these wild, extravagant adventures which place himself and others in danger. And so he lets his stomach get the best of him, which is more in disobedience of the natural law.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you've talked a lot in this paper about the necessity of law and ordering life, and I would like you to say more about what is the effect of too much law in our life. What's the effect of being too overcome with law, being overly taken with law? And I always remember a phrase that I found very amusing. Someone said, if you think that a messy desk is a reflection of a messy mind, what do you think an empty desk is? Well, there's some people that seem to have everything tidy, and there's a little too ordered, and that sometimes a bit of disorganization is a sign of the inspiration of our minds and a sort of genius that is inspired in us. Do you think that there can be a detrimental effect of too much law in our lives?
For sure. I didn't necessarily remember too much of what Martin Luther said until you remembered it. Then actually I remembered a lot of the reading that came back to mind. It's like, oh yes, I remember that. But that's a good example of his view, which I agree with. Too much law, and I say you do need to be wary of too much law, because in too much law, spiritually, too much law spiritually, you'll get too caught up into. For instance, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they lost the way. I mean, Jesus condemns them, because although they were scholars of the law, Jesus condemns them. and they had gotten too caught up in doing what the law says. Law says this and law says that, and they also didn't do necessarily what was right, and God condemns them for not doing what was right in their heart, but doing what is right, like all on the paper. And so their heart was not with God. And so my personal belief is that Jesus condemns them, and a lot of these scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees, they're not going to go to heaven because they did not love God. They loved the law of God, but they didn't love God. But they loved the law that God had. That's the way of putting it. They loved God's law, but they didn't love God. And gotta be careful about that, because God looks at the heart, as Ben Ferguson stated, that it's the heart that God looks at, and that's what counts. So the scribes, like the Sadducees and Pharisees, have lost that. And I say, like, within a culture, you definitely got to be too careful about how oppressive a government can be, because look through our history, and that has happened before for sure. As our governments, they put too many laws and restrictions on these people, and that's that is a stark contrast of what the meaning of what freedom is. So if you want to say that you live in a free country, such as America, where you have too many laws, then are you really living in a free country?
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Carlson. Anybody else? Other questions? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Carlson. All right, and our last for the evening is Mr. Derek Ballou, and I saw him here. He kind of goes in and out. So hopefully we'll get started with him. I think we might get Derek to start a little early if we can, and then we can finish up. So let me just make sure everything's set up and ready to go for Derek, and we'll get going.